Hello, my name is Professor Valerie Osterveld, and I'm the Acting Director of the Center for Transitional Justice and Post-Conflict Reconstruction. Welcome to our very first speaker of the 2023-24 TJ Speaker Series year. Before I introduce Marta, I want to mention that if you're a graduate student, the Transitional Justice Center offers a collaborative graduate specialization. If you're interested in that, feel free to talk to me. It also offers a minor in transitional justice if you're an undergraduate student. And if you're a faculty member and not already associated with the center, we have room for more, so please feel free to come and talk to me. Also, please feel free to help yourself to the snacks at the back that I've provided. I know that many of you ran from your classes to come here, and we appreciate that. Now on to the main event. I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Marta Dyczok, jointly appointed to the History and Political Science departments here in the Faculty of Social Sciences and a member of the Center for Transitional Justice. She specializes in international politics and history with a focus on East Central Europe and Eurasia, and specifically Ukraine, which she's going to talk to you about today. Indeed, she and I co-hosted a conference last year, an online conference with respect to Ukraine, and if you're interested in that, it is now on the front page of the Center for Transitional Justice's website. She's currently involved in a number of research projects involving Ukraine and spent the month of August in Ukraine doing research, and that is what she's going to speak to you about today on the topic of conducting research in Ukraine during war. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dyczok.
Thank you. I need to learn to project like Professor Osterveld. There are some chairs up here if you want to grab one and take it back there, because standing is fun, but sitting is more fun. Thank you all for coming. I am very grateful to Professor Osterveld and the TJ Center for inviting me to speak, because ever since I got back from Ukraine, everybody's been asking me, how was your trip? How was your trip? And I have so much to say, but I can't possibly be saying the same thing over and over again. So I thought I would love to give a talk. So thank you for coming, and here's where I get to tell you about the trip that I took to Ukraine. I have started recently a new project. Those of you who know me, I've been conducting research and traveling to Ukraine and publishing on Ukraine. For a number of years, one of my focuses has been media. And what I started sometime in the spring, summer, is a new project which is looking at how the escalated war changed social media usage in Ukraine. This is something, social media is so pervasive, it's such a powerful force in our lives. And when Russia escalated its war against Ukraine, I started following President Zelensky and his daily speeches to society. And he is a very effective communicator, and he really uses social media extremely well. So that was my first sort of point of interest, and I published a little article about that, not a little article, a big article. But there's so much more happening in social media than just the president and just his outreach. So I thought I would like to study these. And I came up with this pilot project, and I'd like to thank Melanie Lamani from the research office for helping me formulate this project. And at this stage, I just want to really come up with an agenda of what I want to study. So for this particular small project, what I am doing is I'm looking at 3 sources to answer the question of how the escalated war has transformed social media usage. So I'm collecting all the stuff that's already been published, primarily by Ukrainian scholars and analysts. What I wanted to do in the summer and did is I conducted in-depth interviews with a number of categories of people, and the 3rd source is sociological data. So I will be commissioning studies by the Kiev Institute of Sociology to commission those studies. So the first part I can do in my office. The last part I will be commissioning, but it's the interviews. That's the part that I like the best and is in many ways the hardest. So when I was thinking of what kind of people I want to interview, I came up with 3 categories. This is a very strange room because I I can't see my presentation, so I have to keep looking back and forth. But the three types of people I wanted to talk to at this preliminary stage were government officials, people who, again, from that idea that Zelensky and other government agencies are mounting a very effective social media campaign, journalists, who are the ones who are in the heart of it, and also analysts. So those are the three categories of people. And when I came up with this project, and I got funding for it, thank you, Social Science Faculty, Research Western, et cetera, I designed it in a way that I could do it either from Western or go. And of course, I wanted to go to do the interviews in person because anybody who does qualitative research, you know that in-person interviews are so much better than interviews on Zoom. So I wrote that into the proposal saying, conditions permitting, I'd like to go to Ukraine. And most people said, are you crazy? Why don't you just do your interviews on Zoom? There's a war going on there. And I thought about it, and the person who helped me make the decision, she's a Ukrainian former member of parliament whose husband works in military intelligence. And in February of 2022, he said, take the kids and leave so that I can do my job. So she came to Toronto, and we became friends. She went back periodically to visit her husband. And then in the spring, she said, we're going back. And I said, what, you and your kids? And she said, yeah, it's safe enough to go. And I thought, well, if she's taking her kids back, I can go. So I started planning this trip. And it was quite the trip to plan, because as you know, Ukraine is on the receiving end of this war, so the whole country is a no-fly zone, and the whole country is under curfew. So to get to Ukraine, and this is your question, you have to fly to a neighboring country and take a train. And there is a direct train. I flew to Warsaw, because I flew with Les, my friend that I was telling you about. But the train from Warsaw to Kyiv gets sold out like this. So there were no tickets for the day that I needed them. So I ended up having to take 3 trains from Warsaw to Krakow, and then change trains, find my way, and then from Krakow to Transitional. And I actually missed that train, so there was a panic, but I'll tell you about that over coffee. And the last train was from Transitional to Kyiv. And I'd like to do a big shout out to Heidi Van Galen from the history department. When I actually was going, she said, I want you to post on Facebook every day. I want to see you. Not what you're saying, I want to see you, what you're doing. I want to see that you're alive and well. So I did. And so I arrived in Kyiv, and there I am, 42 hours later, and of course you have to carry all your stuff when you're traveling by train. So I had my friend picking me up saying, this is my arrived in Kyiv picture. So how was it being there? That's the question everybody asks me. I want to tell you 2 things. One thing is about Kyiv at war, and the other about my research. So I'm going to start with the first part because that's, when you arrive, what are your impressions? Well, one of the first things I did is I had a friend help me download this app, which is still on my phone, and it's an air raid, it's an air raid alert app. And this is something that when we watch the war from here, we see this much. When you go there, you see the whole picture, right? And this much is about the killing, the destruction, the bombing, which is, the heart of the war. But the other part that, you read about, but when you're there, you experience it, is it's such a sophisticated society digitally. They have this air raid app, which is available in multiple languages, so you download it, and you can put it in, you choose the language you want it to be in, and you choose the region where you are, so that it's like geographically located. And they have Mark Hamill's voice. Let the force be with you. He is one of the ambassadors. Like Ukraine has got all these people to assist them in various ways. So he's one of the people who's helping. And so you hear his voice saying, air raid alert, please proceed to shelter. And then when it's over, then the air raid alert goes off and you get another message. And what I wanted to do, which is why Cam was here, is I wanted to play the air raid alert for you, because I recorded it just so that you hear what it sounds like. But I couldn't embed it in there, so I'm just going to play it. Let's try that again. Can you hear that? So that's what happens a number of times a day. But when I got there, I was so excited, so I had to go for a walk around. And this is the main square, the Maidan Nezalezhnosti. There's this big sign that says, "I love Ukraine." And of course, everybody takes a picture there. This is what Kyiv looks like at night. It's a beautiful city. And the thing that struck me the whole time I was there, sort of first impressions in the whole time, is there's this dissonance. That on the one hand, there's an undercurrent of tension because the war's happening and those sirens go off all the time when you get your alerts. On the other hand, people are getting on with their lives and living life and going for walks and doing research and all sorts of things. So this is what sort of everyday Kyiv looks like. People are buying and selling flowers. They're, delivering food. And this is, again, the digital stuff in the subway. This is new. 4 years ago it was in there. They have all these multiple language. If you can't find your way, you just touch the screen and you choose your language and they tell you where you need to go. There's bicycle lanes all over the city, which is also new. There are e-filling stations for people who have Porsches that are electronic. So there's all sorts of things like that. But there's also signs of war. So this sign says bomb raid shelter. You see them all over. Statues are covered up to protect them. That's in the courtyard of the building that I was in. That's at the foot of the street that I was at. Parts of the city are blocked off. There are checkpoints. You're not supposed to take pictures of checkpoints. This is not a checkpoint. This is the shopping mall where, right where I was staying, and the sign says during air raid alerts, the mall will be closed. And then you go for a walk in the park. But that's just to give you a sense of, I went out for dinner with some friends and then we went for a walk in the park. And there's musicians and there's people and life is normal. And then there's that statue boarded up because, it might get bombed. So that's kind of what it's like being there. So what did I actually accomplish? I didn't spend all my time walking around parks and listening to music. I actually was there to do research, which I was very pleased at how much I accomplished because when I was setting out, I had no idea how much I would be able to get done. I had my list. This is what I want. And those of you who do interviews, you go through the research ethics approval process. And I reached out, I set up my list of people I wanted to talk to, and I reached out to people in advance saying, here's my new project, and these are the dates that I will be here in Kyiv, and could I request an interview? And some of them responded right away. Some of them said, call me when you're in Kyiv. Some of them didn't respond. So I didn't actually know what I would accomplish, but I got through my entire list, although there were a few changes, because I wanted 4 government officials, 4 journalists, and 4 analysts. All the analysts said yes, except 3 of them weren't in Kyiv. One of them was in Barcelona, one of them was in Vienna, and one of them was in a village visiting her parents. And they said, we can do it on Zoom. And I said, no, I can do it on Zoom from Toronto or from Western. So there was only one analyst who was in Kyiv that I interviewed in person. And the government officials, out of the 4 that I wanted, I interviewed 2. And those were really good interviews. And then, of course, I did a few more journalists. So that's how that happened. And I also, for my big project that I want, I'm looking for collaborators in Ukraine. And so I set up, tentatively, a research relationship with the Ukrainian Institute of Media and Communications, and I got set up the sociological stuff that I want to get to. So the interviews, that was the gist of what I was doing. My first interview was with Natalia Humaniuk. I have photographs of everybody else except Natalia. Natalia's one, she's a top journalist, and they're all pretty high-powered journalists. She wrote back to me and said, the only day that I can see you that I'll be in Kyiv is on Saturday the 6th. And this was 2 days after I arrived. And my plan was, I'm going to arrive, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to get used to jet lag, and I'll start working on Monday. But she said, the only time I can meet with you is on Saturday. I said, okay, Saturday's fine. And she said, 8 o'clock in the evening. I thought, okay, fine. And then she texts me and says, sorry, something's come up, let's make it 6. I was like, fine, just tell me where. So I showed up, and she picked this hipster cafe, which is in the city center. And there's all these people like you sitting around. It's Saturday night, beautiful summer evening. They're drinking, talking, flirting. And here we are doing an interview. So this was my first interview, and because of all this, I didn't think to take her picture. And she's doing a really interesting project that I didn't know about. And sort of the use of social media and how it's changed during war, I discovered a lot of new things from these interviews. And from her, she is collecting social media evidence, and this is relevant for you, I didn't get a chance to talk to you about this, as evidence for war crimes trials. So social media, people are documenting all the atrocities that have been happening. And what has been a problem with war crimes trials in the past is you don't have the evidence, right? But in this case, because of social media, because Ukrainians, everybody has a cell phone, everybody's been documenting, and she's collecting this in something called the Reckoning Project. And they've put together a team of journalists and lawyers so that they collect the data in a way that can be used in a court of law. So that was my interview with Natalia. So we're doing this interview, and then my app goes off. And so, because I record interviews on my phone, so my recording device stopped. And she's like, oh, okay, air raid siren. And she looks around and she says, oh, well, we're behind 2 walls. Because the rule is you should be 2 walls away, 2 walls inside. You know what I'm talking about, yeah. Because an exterior wall, if a bomb or something falls, the wall will crumble and it'll hit you. But if you're behind the second wall, you're safe. So she looks around, she says, we're safe. So we continued the interview. And that's kind of how all the interviews went. That during most of the interviews, there were air raid sirens that were going off, or various other things that were happening, and they were just taking it all in stride, and like checking for safety first, and then just continuing work. So this is Irena Slavinska. She is the head of radio culture. And she actually, what she told me that was very interesting that I hadn't thought of is the role of radio during war, because my focus is on social media. But social media is dependent on the internet, right? And Russia has been bombing infrastructure and cutting out communications. The radio waves continue to work. So that was something that I hadn't thought of then, and that's something I need to think more about. I'm just going to show you pictures of the people that I did interview. This is Alexander Tkachenko. He was the Minister of Information and Culture. Gave me a really, really good interview, and he resigned 10 days before I arrived in Ukraine. So he had a lot of time. Because usually these government people, they're like, okay, took me out to lunch. He gave me a really long, in-depth interview that again, he told me about how, information policy at the senior, at the ministry level, how they were doing that. This is the head of public broadcasting in Ukraine. He also described to me how public broadcasting is shifting towards digital, that they have radio, television, and digital. And I don't know if I put a picture of their newsroom. He gave me a tour. Their newsroom is fantastic, like it's way better than the CBC's. It's like super modern, and they're constantly sort of working. And also from him, I got a report that they did on social media, like how their audiences, where they get their news and information, and the digital is where they're getting it. So that was something that was really useful to get. Dmitro Kharkin, this was probably my most dramatic interview. He's on the board of the public broadcaster, and he took me down into their bomb shelter. And so we did the interview sitting in the hallway there. And then if you look at the picture where I'm in, this building was built in the Stalin era. And this was at the time and continues to be the main communications place in Ukraine. And Dmitro, after the interview, he gave me a tour of all the facilities. And what he explained is not surprising. This was built in the Stalin era during the Cold War. It's designed to withstand nuclear assault. And it has the capacity to continue broadcasting. Back then it was just radio, and then later it became television. They can continue broadcasting for, I can't remember, I have to look at my notes, a week or something. They have the generators and the power and the capacity to keep broadcasting during nuclear war. And it's ironic that Stalin was building these facilities to protect the Soviet Union from the nasty capitalist West, and now Ukraine is using it to protect itself from the genocidal Russians who were trying to exterminate them. And it's the same with the bomb shelters, because a lot of them are the subways. And again, they were designed to be bomb shelters. And so now they're being used to protect. So that was a really interesting interview. And the value of doing in-person research. This interview afterwards, he was walking me, I had a little break between my next appointment. And Dmitro, he is the voice of the president, which means when the president arrives somewhere, his voice is the one that says, and here is President Zelensky, or here is President Poroshenko. So he gets to meet these people close up. And I thought, okay, we're just walking down the hall chatting. I said, so what's Zelensky like? Because you've met him. And he was very cautious. He's like, oh yeah, I've met a lot of presidents. I've been doing this for a long time. But he did drop a few hints, which you have to wait till I write all this up to hear what he said about Zelensky. And again, as we were walking, I bumped into another colleague who's not a journalist, but it's the guy in the white shirt there. He runs an NGO called SEDEM, which is a democracy program. And we started chatting, and as it turns out, they have done some very interesting research on Facebook during this escalated war, which I didn't know about. So again, this is plugging the going out there and doing your research in person, because this is the source that I wouldn't have found, or it would have taken me a long time to find, but this way, he just said, oh yeah, you're doing this, here's this research that we've done, maybe you can use it. Vadim Kripyak, he is a television journalist. I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to speed up here. These are just Marta Dyczok, she's the analyst. She's the director of the Ukrainian Media and Communications Institute. And again, look at these people's faces, right? Like, you never think this is people that are like on the receiving end of this horrible war. This is the editor of Ukraine's top online paper. She's Crimean Tatar by origin. And she did her interview. She said, I hope you don't mind if I keep my little dog during the interview. I said, of course not. And then afterwards, she was walking me somewhere. he said, oh, let's do a selfie. So that's, and by the way, Seville and Natalia, who's the first one, they've just recently won awards for reporting during war, these international awards. So these are very nice people who are very high-powered and do very serious work. Oh, and there's a picture of me actually doing research. That's interviewing a journalist, Andriy Kulikov, and again, like, see the atmosphere there, like we're sitting in a cafe, and he's just giving me all sorts of interesting insight. I also did a bunch of other stuff, so my research was my focus, but you know, those of us who do this sort of stuff get invited to do other things too, so the National reached out and I did a stint with them at one point. Hromadski Radio did an interview with me. I got invited to be in another documentary, so that's very exciting. I also did a number of presentations at the Kyiv School of Economics and the Ukrainian, and there was a photographer at this event, which is why I got all those nice headshots that I can now use for my new webpage, because like, you always got to get a good photographer. And I got to see Max. Some of you know Max, Maxim Svyazhintsev. He was a PhD student in the history department, defended a brilliant dissertation, went back to Ukraine, was offered a postdoc at Harvard, and then 24th February happened. So what does Max do? Signed up. And he's been fighting ever since. And I've been in touch with him, but I actually got to see him. And he was, fortunately for me, his unit was in Kyiv, because they get deployed and then they're back, and so he was back, of course. So he was in Kyiv. They're still on duty. So it was kind of hard meeting up with him, because he said, I don't know what my schedule is until the morning. So I can't make an appointment. So I said, so I called him one day and he said, fine. And then he calls back and says, no, we're being sent to do something. Can't make it. And so Monday morning I called him and I said, Max, what have you got planned? And he said, I don't know. I said, come now, before they could. So he came over and we sat and he just talked for hours and told me his story. And I thought, wow. So I asked him if he would be willing to share it with others. And he said, sure. So I then set up an interview with Hromadski Radio. They do English language podcasts. And so I did one with Max where he shares his story. And as soon as that's done, I can share it with the rest of you. And the other thing, like, this is Max. He's been through hell. He's seen his anyway, this is the resilience, right? I also got to see some friends. This is Ilimdar. He's a Crimean Tatar. He also volunteered and has been fighting in various places. Another person I'm in touch with regularly. I didn't interview him for my project because he does various other things. He owns a restaurant and now he's shooting down Russian drones over Kyiv. So we talked about the war more generally. And he showed me all sorts of photographs and videos. He showed me this one video, and it's a drone, and then a missile shoots it. And I'm watching it, and he said, that's me. I shot down that drone. And my colleague filmed me doing it, and this is what I do for a living. But again, he was also based in Kyiv at the time that I was there. And when we met up, this is him saying, hey, you're here. And that's what everybody said when I saw them. They're like, you came. This is, and something I didn't see in Kyiv is people were not walking around in fatigues. What they were walking around in is like this, and Max also. And what Ilimdad explained to me is they've been instructed not to wear their war gear in the city so as not to traumatize people. So they wear, the Zelensky look, right? That's what they call it. But he has his gear with him, and he showed me, this is the trunk of his car. And he said, you want to see my gear? I was like, okay. So he opened it, and the duffel bag, and he's like showing me everything, and here's the helmet, and here's the bulletproof vest, and takes it out, see how light it is? This is my third one. The first one was really heavy. And then, I also cried this time, he pulled out his shirt, and he took the chevron I don't know the word for chevrons, but it's those unit things, and he took them off and he said, here. So those of you who watch Zelensky's speeches, he's got a whole wall of chevrons, right? So every time he visits a military unit, they give him one. So he's got this huge collection. I have two, but they're from my friend Ilandar, so that was invaluable. I wasn't able to upload the pictures, and this is the last thing. I didn't work all the time. I went to visit my friends on weekends. They have country houses called dachas and villages. And that was also really interesting because both Natalia and Diana, who invited me one weekend and the other, their houses are in villages that were occupied in the spring of 2022. So visiting those, you have to cross a river to get to there, and I mean, I go to their dachas every summer. I'm there. So I've been on this trip, and I never really pay attention too much to the details, but this time the river was flooded to stop the advance of Russian tanks, and it's still flooded. I don't want to show you the picture, but I shared it another time, and it's eerie because you really do see. And in another place, a bridge was blown out, so there's a temporary bridge, and all over it there are checkpoints. But you're not supposed to take pictures of that stuff, so I didn't. But also just listening to the experiences of, they don't live there, they're like weekend houses or cottages. But, having experienced that. Okay, back to work stuff. Moving forward. Because I want to leave time for questions. What I will be doing now is processing all that data. I have all these great interviews. And to, go through them, pull out what I want, and set up my new agenda. And the thing that was really good is I got a lot of new information that I hadn't thought about. So I hadn't thought about how regulation of social media can be negative. Because what I learned through that research that Ihoris and Sedem are doing is Facebook has been censoring Ukrainians. And they were talking about how things that are called graphic content, and they get banned. And so they are documenting atrocities for a purpose, not to freak people out, but to create a record. And Facebook is banning it. And so that's one example of what Facebook has been doing, and Twitter as well. So that's something I hadn't thought about. So I need to do a little bit more research on that and figure out where that's going to fit in. The role of radio. Again, I hadn't thought about that a whole lot. But social media and the internet, they're only useful if it's working. And if it's not working, you still need information. And that's where, a lot of the radio people, they said, radio's having this big revival. And a lot of people, once the internet is there, they listen to radio online. But if it's not there were all these stories that I heard from the radio people that I interviewed, that people had their old radios, and they pulled them out, and that's how they communicated where the Russians were, and where it was safe to leave, and where there was food, and all this sort of stuff. And this is Hromadske Radio that I've been working with for a long time. They were collecting and sharing that information. So it was like a survival lifeline. Changing media landscape, that was my last thought. Anyway, we'll just leave that up there. This was the interview, the Serhiy Lashchenko. Oh, I forgot to put Serhiy Lashchenko's picture up there. I interviewed an advisor to President Zelensky's chief of staff. And that was the hardest interview, because he responded right away. He said, yeah, I'll be happy to talk to you, but, call me on WhatsApp or do this or that. And so for 3 weeks, I'm chasing him. And the day that I'm interviewing Max, we finished the interview, took out Max for coffee to chit-chat, and my phone goes off. And it's Serhiy Lashchenko saying, I'm available in 1 hour at this place. Do you want to, So I was like, Max, gotta go. ran to that place and did the interview with him, and he said a lot of interesting things because he sits at the table with Zelensky when they're doing their information policy. And he had a lot of really insightful things to say. But, they're cagey, these government officials. They're not going to tell you the things that a journalist is open with you. But these government officials, they're not. So I recorded everything, and I'm going to be reading it very carefully to see what he was trying to tell me without actually saying it. And that's where I'm going to stop. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Any questions?
Hey, thank you, Marta. That's fascinating and quite moving. Just two questions to start things off. One is, I'm curious, how unusual were you as somebody coming, internationally to Kiev? Obviously, tourists aren't coming right now, but were there quite a few other people, or is that a very unusual thing? That's my one question. And the other one is, I guess, a little different. I was wondering, how would you describe if you could describe the mood of people, and is there, from the outside, it seems like there's this really strong solidarity that's been forged by this traumatic experience. Is that what you experienced, or are there people perhaps that have different opinions? Are there debates about kind of how to approach life in this war situation or the war effort? So those are my questions.
Thanks. Those are good questions. Can you hear me without the mic? Excellent. Can you move? I like these mics that you can move around. But anyway, how unusual was I? People have been traveling to Ukraine since the war started. David Johnson, former British Prime Minister, he was the first. He went in the spring of 2022. Trudeau's been, Biden's been, Macron's been, journalists are working there. But when I was talking to my friends in Ukraine about coming and saying this, they said, yeah, Trudeau has like a security detail. Biden has a security detail. You're going to be coming on your own. So there weren't very many academics. There were some. I actually met two other researchers while I was there, Emma and Natalia. And the Kyiv School of Economics that invited me to give a talk. There was a visiting professor there, a professor of law actually. So some people are going, but it was still that UK kind of, like it's not that common. In terms of the atmosphere, it was mixed. That's what I was trying to convey, that on the one hand you feel the war, on the other hand people are getting on with their lives. And there's unity in the opinion that, this is a horrible war. But there are some people who are actively engaged in protest, like doing something. And other people who are like, oh yeah, the Ukrainian armed forces, go. Let's have another drink. Right? So there's both of that. It's not like everybody's not on the same page. And in terms of supporting the war effort, everybody's in agreement with that. But again, with the interviews and a lot of the casual conversations that happened sort of before or after, not everybody thinks Zelensky's doing a great job. And you may know that recently Zelensky fired his defense minister. Now, why do you fire a defense minister when your country's at war? Well, there were corruption issues. And just today, the new minister fired 6 deputy ministers. And that's the sort of stuff that journalists were talking about, because they're watching it closely. But one of the dilemmas they face is balancing reporting accurately on what's going on, but sort of maintaining positive morale. Right? So that's that tricky balance, because there are people who actively hate Zelensky. These are his political opponents. And again, what I suspected but had confirmed through some of these interviews is the former President Poroshenko and Zelensky, they're constantly like this, but they've come to a backroom agreement that they don't criticize each other anymore. Because, Zelensky was going to be suing Poroshenko for corruption, and Poroshenko was going to be suing Zelensky for something or other, right? This was before 2022. So if you look at 2019, 2020, 2021, they're like this. But after the 22nd, they made this deal, we're going to stop that public fighting. They're still fighting behind the scenes, obviously, but they're keeping that common front so that they don't give ammunition to Russia to say,
Marta, have you noticed any changes in the language situation in Kyiv? I'm asking because the area where I'm from, location, as you know, it was very highly repressed by the Soviet Union, and even for years as the embassy was mostly Russian. But now I notice my friends who used to be Russian speaking, they switch to Ukrainian as fast as they can. Sometimes it's surges, it's like a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian, very peculiar to that eastern part of Ukraine. So my impression is that now, because of the war, they switch to Ukrainian as a way of showing their patriotism, their loyalty to Ukraine. Even though before that language was not a mark of not necessarily the mark of their Ukrainian identity. So what's the situation in Ukraine?
That's an excellent question. Something that I said during an interview with Hromadske Radio was that there has been one positive side effect of this horrible war, and that is that, first of all, the world knows a lot more about Ukraine than they ever did before, and that Ukrainians have become more conscious of their identity than before. So things like which language you speak and this and that wasn't such a big issue for a lot of people until they started being killed for it. So it's brought a lot of stuff to the surface, and that trend that you described, a lot of people, they said, I'm not going to speak the language of those people who are coming here to kill me. And the whole concept of Russian culture being superior to Ukrainian culture, people don't believe that anymore. So there's been a real shift in the way people think about who they are. And there have been public opinion polls conducted which show that 80% of the population supports the president and his war aims. And Zelensky was interviewed just yesterday, or last couple of days, where an American journalist asked him, are you sure you're not prepared to give up some territory for peace? And he said, no, because what happens on those territories is our people get tortured and killed. Why should we condemn our people to that horrible fate? And would you be prepared to give up, I don't know, Hawaii or California if China attacked you? So there's a change in
We have time for one more question.
Two, if you're quick.
Right, sure.
Wait, you go first, you go second, and then I'll answer both.
So my question is related to self-care and mental health strategies that you used during your research. And I was wondering if you had any tips that you could give to researchers around either into conflict situations or post-conflict situations where there's still tensions.
Good question. And what was your question?
I know Biden loves to encourage.
Sorry, can you-
5% with sanctions that Russia help that out. The only way to really stop it by Russia alone. How would you kind of say that biggest relates with how to get out of it? Probably the ones that they're
I'm going to ask your question first, and then the media reports generally in this Canada, U.S., Britain, they're okay overall, but some of the commentators don't get it. And that's because a lot of people don't go to Ukraine, and they just watch it from a distance. So they don't always have a read on public opinion, they don't read Ukrainian sources, so they often don't have the information that 85% of the population supports this. So that's what they need to be reporting on. I think the big question with the U.S. is what's going to happen with the election. that's the thing to watch. And your question, was that about people like me going into the field or people in Ukraine that are...
It was about researchers going into
Oh, well, you know, you just drink a lot of wine. It's hard. You have to sort of psychologically prepare yourself, and you also have to pace yourself, and you have to make sure you're going. But, you know, I was talking about going away on weekends. I did that deliberately because you need to take a break from work, and that's not just when you're out in the field. That's here too, because you know, the stress will get to you. So I think it's really just pacing yourself and learning to create a little bit of a distance while still kind of being open. I struggle with that, to be honest. Because, I mean, a number of people, like, they're my friends for 30 years, and it's hard to... So I don't know if I could give you very good advice for that. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Please join me in thanking Marta. I just wanted, before you go, to let you know about the next transitional justice speaker, which will be on our very own Lois Morewa on October 26th and at noon in this room, and she's going to be talking about gender justice in Liberian peace huts, options for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Thank you, everybody. If anyone wants to take food, please go get some. Take it away. And thank you again for coming.